my presentation. Let's go to this mode. Cool. April 5th. My name is Teo Lachev, your leader for the past 10 years, in case you don't know. How many of you are new, by the way? Do we have any new people joining us today?
Yes, I'm new. Yeah, I'm not
You
sure if you can see me. I'm Nina York.
No, I can't see you, Nina. Where are you
I'm
joining
in
us from?
Atlanta. I'm in
Atlanta.
Atlanta, Dunwoody.
Line it down, Woody. Nice. Thank you so much for joining us. Hopefully, you'll find our meetings useful. Um, Anybody joining outside Atlanta from faraway places? Sometimes we get people from all over the world. How about today? Anybody in chat window? Anybody outside Georgia? Let's see. Dallas. There we go. Dallas, Puerto Rico. There we go. We're moving outside. Okay. Very nice. So Puerto Rico now wins the record for the furthest location. So April 5th meeting, and I want to also thank the other people who are helping with this group. By the way, guys, I'll appreciate if you can mute your mic unless you want to talk, or I'm going to do that for you. I did it. So if you want to ask a question or say something, then please unmute yourself. Cool. So speaking about helpers, I want to thank John, Damu, Ed, all of these people that actually continue helping the group. So as they say, it takes a village to actually run a group. I appreciate all the community effort. So today, first thing that I want to do is to go through some housekeeping things and news and announcements. And then we're going to jump to also I want to show you some of the latest things that we have in Power BI. And then we're going to do the main presentation around 7 o'clock. So those of you who kind of joined us the last few times, you probably remember that there were two sites, well, let's just step back a little bit. So initially we were affiliated with the SQL Pass. Our website was on SQL Pass, but you know what happened with SQL Pass, it's not longer there. So then, we switched to our primary site is actually on Meetup. Great that we were redundant because otherwise we had to scramble to find where to put the site on. And then there was another organization called Dynamic Communities, which also was doing something around, next generation user group hosting. So if you remember the previous few meetings, actually have a secondary site, but they gave up on the secondary site. So now they delegated to Microsoft. It looks like Microsoft is going to do around Power BI site that I just heard about, but nobody actually showed me anything interesting at this point. So for the time being, long story short, our primary site is going to be Meetup. This is where you sign up. This is where we're going to post the meeting notifications. Once Microsoft build this great thing that they're going to be working on right now, then maybe that will be a secondary. We'll see what will happen at that point. After each meeting, hopefully get some value, spread the word around. Also, as I mentioned, we are recording these meetings, and you can find the recordings on this location here. This is actually pointing to YouTube. When you go there, click there, https bit.ly Atlanta BI Rex. This is where we're going to find the recordings, including the one from today. If you want to get more involved, always looking for speakers, sponsors, not so much nowadays, but we will, when we start meeting in person, we will. And the last thing that I want to, it looks like there are some people that want to make announcements around jobs. Is anybody looking for BI talent? Please feel free to unmute yourself.
Hey, Teo. This is John. I'm working with a new consulting agency called Revolution Technologies, and they're looking for a senior BI developer. And the role is it's a long contract for a year, might be extended. It's for basically Power BI and to do some ETL, some SSIS. They're a full Microsoft shop. And so the recruiter was going to be on tonight, but he wasn't going to be able to make it. So I told him I'd go ahead and share it with the group, and I'll put the information in the chat. I have a Word document that he wrote, kind of put together. So his name is Brendan. So contact him. You don't have to contact me. I'm not a recruiter. I'm not switching jobs. I'm still in BI. So please contact him if you're interested. Thank you.
So that was Revolution Technologies, contract opportunity. It looks like long-term contract, and John's gonna put the link in the chat window. Anybody else looking for having any job opportunities, looking for BI resource? Looks a lot. So if you do, maybe you can put it in the chat window, share with the community. Otherwise, I'll be moving on. On the events side of things, April 6th, tomorrow, we are launching, Microsoft is launching the business application launch event, where they're going to talk about the latest developments in the what we call Power Platform, which is Power BI, Power Automate, virtual agents, and Power Apps, and also Dynamics. So this is going to be a free virtual event, and you're going to get also the all the presentations in here. Always a good idea to join. And then we have Power BI Summit also coming up this month, April 19 to 23. Now that's not going to be a free event. That's going to be a paid virtual event, but it's a good value. And this is the URL right here. So these two events, you know, happening this month. So on some things that caught my attention since the last time we met, which was March 1st, I believe. Some of the most exciting things around Power BI and beyond, pay per user, and I'm sorry, premium per user and Gen 2 became general availability. We talked about that before. Those of you who actually don't know what I'm talking about, you know, Power BI licensing can get confusing, as you guys know it. You know, trust me, you know, with my consulting career, I got clients that are generally perplexed. They keep on having meetings to explain licensing. But previously we had obviously licensing per user, which is $10 per month. This is how Power BI started. And then we have Power BI Premium, which was meant for large organizations that want to license a lot of users. So now we have this hybrid licensing model called premium per user, which is actually great for smaller companies, because if you want to have premium features, let's say you build some semantic model, you put a lot of data into it, and it's growing beyond 1 gigabyte, which is the maximum limit of a Power BI dataset. So now you want to actually go beyond that. If Power BI Premium is cost prohibitive, it started at $5,000 per month. But what you can say to your boss, if we pay twice the licensing fee that we pay today, which is $10 per user, if we go $20 per user, then actually we're going to get most of the premium features. And now we have the ability to have a large data set, so that data set can grow and grow and grow in size. So that model was heavily, I think it's going to be great for kind of open a lot of possibilities for smaller companies. So actually now you can start a trial and just purchase it eventually. Generation 2, this is again on the site of Power BI Premium. So when you buy premium capacity, Microsoft, think of it like they give you a virtual VM, virtual machine, like a server. They say, Teo, you pay $5,000. We're going to give you, let's say, 25 gigabytes of RAM, 8 cores, only for ProLogica, right? So it's going to be your thing, right? This is where your Power BI is going to go. But then there were some issues with this approach. We talked a little bit more about the last time. The performance was one issue, especially if you're running multiple refreshes, concurrent refreshes. So with this generation 2, it's a little bit more like a platform as a service kind of thing, in a sense that when you need more resources, they come from a shared capacity. So long story short, if you are on premium, either Power Premium or this premium per user, I highly recommend you go ahead and enable this generation 2. It's a very simple slider. You go to the capacity properties and you just turn it on. That's it. When you turn it on, a lot of things happen, and all of them are for good. More than likely, your performance is going to get better. More than likely, if you have concurrent refreshes, they're going to run faster. So definitely something that I would recommend you try, this generation 2 thing. Although it went into GA as well. The next thing, VNet connectivity for PBI datasets. So this is more on the security side of things. And right now, I think we support only a few Azure data sources like Azure SQL DB and things like this. But the idea here is that if you have on-prem data sources that you want to connect to, eventually what you're going to be able to do is you will be able to create something called private VNet, which is very similar to the way, if you guys use Azure SQL DB, you probably have noticed that maybe your organization or other customers actually are creating something called private VNet to allow access to these resources only for your on-premises network. So you have to VPN into your network before you can actually go and access these services, these Azure services. So what's going to be more interesting, besides security, obviously, here, is that this is also going to eliminate gateways. Gateways, I think I mentioned to you the previous time, actually I can write book just on gateways with all the troubleshooting and the issues that surround gateways. So what I like to see at some point is actually this feature kind of being expanded. So if you have on-prem data source, you will not have to set up a gateway in Power BI. That will be, I think, the biggest benefit out of this feature, besides security, obviously. Visual data preparation, general availability. So this feature probably could be explained better by showing you. So this is a Power Query feature, but to make the things more interesting, it's not available yet. This is one of these features that made it first to data flows. So Power Query in Power BI, it's available in several places. Actually, it's available in a lot of places, but the most traditional ones are Power BI Desktop, and also we have something called data flows. I'm not sure if anyone actually have used data flow, but if you have a data flow like this one here, what's the new feature that we have now allow us to visualize the Power Query steps in a graphical way, which was missing before. Anyone who has done Power Query, they know that we have these applied steps that actually show in the query settings pane. But sometimes when things become more complicated, maybe you're merging queries, maybe you're doing some more complicated stuff. Sometimes it makes sense actually to be able to visualize this. So in Power Query inside Power Query Online, which means Power Query inside data flows, now we have a feature that is called diagram view. All right, so don't look for this feature in Power BI Desktop, you won't find it, but we have it here. So what this allows to actually do is to see the kind of the graphical representation of all of these steps, and who knows where this feature is going to go, but at least looks cool, right? So now we have a graphical representation of the Power Query steps. Now this, the next one, it's really probably say, come on, Theo, you've got a new DAX feature and you put it here as a major feature, but this feature will really make your life easier, especially if you are kind of new to Power BI. So in DAX, which is the most complicated thing in Power BI. So I start with Power BI, you kind of go up and up and up, layer by layer. You get to DAX, and things, this is where you're probably going to have trouble. So in DAX, we have a function called calculate, which is, you can escape this function, and you can spend years and years in DAX and still not understand how actually calculate works, all the nuances. It's always, there is something to surprise you. But one of the limitations that we have in this, so by the way, calculate, the way you use it is that you essentially, one of the things that allows you to do is to filter things. So for example, if I want to create a calculation that returns a revenue, let's say, actually, by the way, this should be sum. Sorry about that, bad Theo, cannot even write basic DAX, so that's what it should be probably. So let's say you have a column called sales amount, and you want to summarize it, but you want to filter it for something. Let's say only for products whose color is red. Then the most efficient way to do that filtering, I keep on seeing people use filter function inside DAX. That's always by magnitude slower unless you a little bit more advanced in DAX and you know that you have to use the all predicate to only specify which columns you want to filter. The most efficient way to do that is to do calculate sum sales amount product color red. That's it. That's how you filter a measure when you index, the most efficient way. But let's say you want to do more complicated filter, like an OR filter or an AND filter. If you have done, before this enhancement, if you have wrote this, in this case, I want to calculate revenue where the product color is red, or the product style is W, right? If you attempt to write this before, you will get an error. It will tell you that the calculate expression express true, false result or something to this extent, and you can scratch your head from this point on, couldn't understand what's going on in there. Now you can basically create these more complicated filters, and they're just going to work. One thing that I gotta try yet is to see if filtering on a measure is going to work, because that also was a limitation of a calculate function, which would force you to create a variable so you can do filtering on a measure, which I do actually quite often in different situations. There is something I need to try, see if that limitation is lifted, but at least now we can specify more complicated filters in the calculate function. Then we have new deployment pipeline capabilities. So pipelines are a feature of what? It's a premium feature in Power BI. So the Power BI, if you're on premium, you will see that there is a feature here called deployment pipeline, right? What does it do? Most organizations, especially large organizations, want to have DevOps, development environment. Then from development, we move it to QA. From QA, we move it to production. And then the question becomes, well, how do we promote content in Power BI from one environment to another? And because Power BI, you cannot go and set up another service, it's tied to your domain. So the way DevOps work is that you create workspaces. You create workspaces for development, for QA, for production, and you deploy stuff, but then you want to be able to promote stuff from one workspace to another. When I say promote, let's say I'm working on development and I want to deploy to production. When I move this content, not only I want to move the latest version of the content, but also I would like to change connection strings to point to different servers and such. So deployment pipelines make this stuff easier for you, although it requires pay premium per user or premium. But it had some limitations. So some of these limitations now are a little bit lifted, and you can actually read the article. One limitation that is still not lifted that I really would like to see at some point lifted, and it looks like if you go to that link, if you just Google new deployment pipeline capabilities, go in there, you will see that actually at the end of the article, they say that maybe they're going to lift that limitation. And that limitation is that right now, this pipeline requires, you can specify only one of the workspaces. So for example, I want to create my workspaces. I have a workspace for development, test, and production. The way, for some obscure reason, the way Microsoft designed it is that when you create a pipeline, you can specify only one workspace, and then Power BI wants to own and create the other workspaces. But typically, in a typical situation, you would want to create these workspaces at the very beginning, so you plan your workspaces. This is my test. This is my production. This is my development. However, you cannot map it. You can map in a pipeline just one workspace today. So that limitation looks like it's going to be lifted this year, and I think then that will make pipelines really, really useful, in my opinion. I think that's on the Power BI side of things. If you guys have any questions, please let me know or put them into the chat window here. Do we have any questions? Specify multiple familiar calculates. Remember hitting the DAX. Okay, very good. Yep. DAX gets easier. Who knows? One day it's gonna just read our mind, and it's machine learning, right? So the last thing that I want to mention here is Azure Purview is going into public, went in public preview. What is Azure Purview? It's a relatively new Azure service. What's the premise behind it? I work for a company. I want to be able to easily document and categorize all the data sources in my organization. Okay? Not only I want to categorize them, but I want to do lineage. So this is one thing that was missing in Microsoft BI for a long, long time. Every now and then, I remember in the SSIS days, can SSIS do lineage? Lineage meaning that I want to trace the entire pipeline all the way to the data source. So if I have an Azure Data Factory nowadays, that's what we use for the cloud. I want to see what data source is using. I want to see what data sources Power BI is using, right? I want to see kind of a landscape of all of my data in my organization. That's what Azure Purview does. I haven't had the chance to try it yet. I know some of my customers actually have interest in it. Give it a try. Now it's free. Go and try, use it, abuse it. See if actually it makes sense for you to use it. Any questions about what I talked about so far? All right, I'm almost done. If you have questions, please unmute yourself. I guess everything is clear. All right, so this meeting, if we don't have any questions, is going to be visualization fundamentals with Power BI. Eugene volunteered to do it, and I'm sure it's going to be great. We meet, those of you who are new, we meet monthly, usually on the first Monday of the month, unless it falls on a holiday. So the next Monday is going to, the next first Monday of the month is going to be May 3rd. We're going to talk about Azure Synapse. So there were some of you asked about, I want to know about Azure Synapse. Everybody's talking about Azure Synapse. What is that? So James Serra, who a few months ago did us a presentation on Azure Data Lake. At that point of time, he was actually with Microsoft, and now he switched gears. He's a data platform architecture lead in Ernst & Young. He's going to come back again, and he's going to tell us all about Synapse. If somebody knows about Synapse, it's James Serra. I highly recommend his blog. You can learn a lot about Data Lake, Synapse, and all that stuff, because his role was evangelist. I wonder now that he's with another company, maybe he will have a little bit more independent view. We'll see what's going to happen. So stay tuned. May 3rd, going to talk about Synapse, switch gears a little bit from Power BI. That was it. That's all from me. Thank you so much, Eugene. I'm going to turn this to you, sir. And I'm going to get out of it. I think you are muted, or maybe not. Yes, you are. Still muted.
There we go.
There you
All right.
go.
Good deal.
Yeah. Go ahead, Eugene.
share screen too. All right, you're all able to see?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you everyone for being here. I appreciate the opportunity to talk and present. So I'm going to be running at about half of my usual speed because I've had a heck of a week the past week. So first I got a stomach bug, and then I had to reschedule my second vaccination shot for a couple days later, and I managed to get that. But I'm starting to feel the side effects of that. So I'm going to be running a little bit slower than usual. I promise I'm usually a lot more animated, a lot more lively. That being said, more than happy to answer any questions that come up. More than happy to hang out a little while and discuss things. The other thing is somehow in my fevered state, I got confused about what I was what I was presenting on. So I'm still going to be presenting on reporting fundamentals. But there are some pieces here that could probably use a little bit of expanding. So I may be doing some, extemporaneizing, talking on the fly. There's some pieces in here about, having a data warehouse or introduction to Power BI that maybe I'm going to go through a little bit faster because they're not as important. But the intention is still, I think you're still going to get some good information about some of these report design fundamentals, about understanding who you're making the reports for. But that being said, if there's anything where you feel there was a gap or you had some specific questions, please ask. We can either answer questions at the end, or I don't think we have a crazy number of people. So if you want to unmute yourself, ask directly, or put something in the chat, maybe Tio can raise it up. Feel free. So with all those caveats and everyone's grace and forgiveness, let's go ahead and start talking about Power BI reporting fundamentals. So real quick about me, I am a business intelligence consultant by trade, and in some ways by accident. 8 years ago, I started my first real job out in the real world, and it said .NET/SQL developer, and I was a year out of college. I'd taken one database course, and I thought, well, I always wanted to be a software engineer. And the reality was, instead of being like 90% .NET and 10% SQL, it was the other way around. And because I could spell SQL, I was suddenly the BI department and the DVA department, right? And so I learned a lot on the fly. I learned what the difference was between a stored procedure, a function, and a view. I remember Googling frantically my first week on the job. And then 3 or 4 years later, our company bought another company, and the salespeople went, oh, we have a SQL person. And suddenly I was a consultant, right? That was how I got flung into the world of consulting, not by choice or intention, but it just kind of happened. And then 2 years ago, coming up like 2.5 years ago, actually, a number of years ago, I started making Pluralsight courses. So that second thing there, I'm a Pluralsight author. I've got 5 courses that are free right now. It's part of Free April on Power BI, and I've been dipping my toes into streaming data. And I did my first course 3 or 4 years ago. It was super niche. It was on-premises data gateways for Power BI, because I figured, like, okay, that's a safe topic. I can't screw that up too badly. And that did okay. That was bringing in a few $100s a month, which is like, it's Xbox money, right? You can buy an Xbox every month or two, right? But it's not enough to live on. And then I did a course on DAX, and that was enough to start thinking about being able to live on it, right? And so I decided to start working for myself. And so for me, I feel like the guy in the movies where there's 2 trucks and he's got a foot on each truck and they start splitting apart, right? That's how I feel sometimes, because with the consulting, it's a lot of hurry up and wait. And with the Pluralsight stuff, one, you get this commission to do a course, and they're like, we'll see you in 3 months, right? And now a lot of the stuff I'm doing has nothing to do with Power BI. I'm doing a course right now on Jaspersoft, which, if you've never heard of it, it's probably for the best. It's as if SSRS was written in Java, is the best way to describe it. So it's very interesting. But I'm glad to do both, because the consulting keeps me grounded, and this past year, a lot of it just declined for obvious reasons. So the royalties have been helping keep me afloat. So it's an interesting balance. And then finally, I'm one of the co-hosts on the SQL Data Partners podcast. So I appreciate being able to do that sort of thing. But enough about me. You came here to learn about Power BI and reporting and how you can build more effective reports. So what are we going to talk about? Some of the things here are going to be about talking about self-service versus centralized, and thinking about that in your report design and what you need to do, and the fact that a centralized data model saves you a lot of the time and effort, but no matter how you're handling these things, you still have to give some good thought to the visualization piece and how people are going to be interacting with the report. What does it mean to be self-service, right? Because at least whenever I started my career, I didn't have a good understanding of how people were using the reports. And so I focused a lot on just getting the data on the screen. And we can do a lot better with that, especially with something like Power BI that has a lot of rich interactivity. And so kind of the golden endpoint is creating reports that can serve a number of different types of users and a number of different use cases without us having to make 3 different reports for 3 different demographics, right? I'm going to talk briefly about Power BI. Like I said, due to some confusion on my part and a little bit of, just being sick the past week, I've got some bits in here about pieces of Power BI. I'm going to assume, though, that most people here, you kind of know the gist of it. So I'll focus mostly on talking about what's unique to Power BI is going to impact our report design. And so we'll talk about how it fits in and all that. But more importantly, the part that's really important is we're going to talk about how we can layer in our report detail, how we can take an incremental approach and kind of start from the bottom up. Because what I think is a challenge when I work with customers is one of 2 things can happen. Either it can be kind of overwhelming. You have this writer's block, you have this blank canvas, and it's like, well, what do I do? Or I've seen people where they're like, okay, we need to fit as much stuff on the screen as possible. And there's a benefit to making use of the space, but I think there's better ways to do it, especially when you take advantage of the interactivity that Power BI provides. And so that's going to be the really important thing. And then I've got a couple other details or recommendations. And like I said, I'm happy to answer questions for anything that I didn't cover. So one of the things that you run into right away when you're talking about Power BI is, do we want to use self-service or centralization? And in reality, Microsoft likes to sell Power BI as a self-service tool, and it truly is. But when you look at where the Microsoft team is working, where a lot of new features are going and all this stuff, I think very quickly, within the first few years, they realized that, okay, if we want to work with these large enterprises, it can't just be the Wild West, right? And every once in a while they do something, and you're like, what are you doing? For example, I think about how, I don't know where they landed with it, but I want to say maybe 2 years ago, they were thinking about making it so that you could pay for a corporate license for stuff on the Power Platform on your own credit card. Basically like pure and literal self-provision. And from an admin perspective, just kind of this nightmare, right? And it's not an either or. I think reality, we've got fully centralized, so everything's IT managed, IT owned. And if you're in that scenario, you really want to give a lot of thought to what we're going to talk about in a second with defining self-service and how you can build reports that enable users, but you still have this kind of this golden record, this canonical endorsed set of reports or what have you. Because in some industries that is a tension, right? You think about heavily regulated industries, something where you're dealing with HIPAA or SOX compliance or anything like that, especially financial reports, and you have to have that under control, right? I remember I did work for a company called Coppers here in the Pittsburgh area. I want to say they're a Fortune 1000 company. I'm not 100% sure, but it boggled my mind that because of SOX compliance, the people who deployed the reports could not be the people who wrote the reports. There had to be this firewall in between to ensure that, to use a phrase, there was no hanky-panky. There was no people trying to alter financial reports to do fraud. So you can have a fully centralized approach, but what I think works best with Power BI is more of a hybrid approach where, okay, especially in somewhat larger organizations, we're going to have this kind of endorsed centralized model. We're going to have maybe a center of excellence if you're talking about a very large organization. We're going to have some administration to make sure that Power BI workspaces don't become like the N drive where everyone had like 50 different Excel files, right? And then you get hit with ransomware and it's a nightmare. But instead, we kind of have these safe waters of what's endorsed and approved and things that are reusable. And then we have the ability for people to go out and venture on their own or explore or what have you. And then finally, you do have places where it is just purely self-service. And sometimes that's necessary. I did work for a customer. It was a one-man shop, and he was dealing with gigabytes of CSV files. So there was no IT department. It was just him, right? And so when you're building reports, you want to give some consideration to where you are on this. And what you will find potentially is that your audience and what their comfort level and capability is may change what approach you have to deal with. I've run into people that they're in accounting or operations. They're very close to the business domain. They've got that expertise and they have a willingness to learn how to do some of this stuff. And then you've got other people that they just want their dashboard. They just want that situational awareness of how are we doing. So gonna jump through here with the layers and kind of what Power BI is made of. But one of the big things is if you've got a data warehouse, you don't have to think as much about this data model piece, but you do want to think about having some sort of golden data model so that people can build reports based off of that. Something that is important, though, is that Microsoft designed Power BI for business users first. I think that's something that's really worth emphasizing. What you're going to find is that as Power BI has evolved, Microsoft basically said, we're going to make it so that someone can get started up really, really quickly. And then as a company, Microsoft is kind of reinventing these best practices slowly, right? Like you hear about data flows and you're like, that sounds a lot like a data warehouse, right? And it's not. And, I'm glad that Matthew Roche isn't here because he works for Microsoft and he owns a number of swords and he might, cut me if he found out that I was comparing the two. But, it really does feel sometimes that they're reinventing the wheel. And like I said, one of the big challenges that I run into with customers is again, there's two problems that I see a lot that I think if you're involved with the report design, especially if you can create something that works almost as a template or as a way to set a precedence can help. The two issues that I see is trying to shove just too much information onto the screen, right? But then the other one is not being aware of some of these features we're going to talk about that allow you to have drill throughs and drill downs and tooltips and all these things where you don't have to have it all on one page, right? Something that I've seen used to really good effect when we talk about encouraging users to start with kind of best design principles are I've seen people make good use of Power BI backgrounds. So one of the cool things you can do is you can do this in PowerPoint if you want, but have these boxes with drop shadows and things that breaks up the report into 1/3, 2/3 kind of design, or have some sort of standard template or some kind of dividers to help with that. going to run through real quick. I think, again, most of you know what Power BI was and is, so we don't need to talk about that piece today. Don't need to talk too much about the specific layers here. But something that I also want to focus on and take a pause and a breath on is that Microsoft designed Power BI for self-service. And I think that you, the audience, presumably people who are creating reports, I mean, I would hope that's why you're attending, is that in some way you're producing reports, whether working in collaboration with other folks or you're more in an IT role and it's more of a centralized role and they're just consuming those reports. Microsoft really did design Power BI for self-service. And I think that it's incredibly important not only to understand that, but to see how you can take advantage of that. And so when we talk about kind of this layering approach, I'll talk about that and how self-service really impacts what you're writing, what you're making. If we were dealing with just SSRS, what I would be saying would be different. So what is self-service BI? And sounds obvious, right? Like I've been measuring this pandemic by the number of self-service haircuts I've had to give, and I'm on number 3. And I swear to goodness, as soon as I'm vaccinated, I am paying some kind person at the mall or near the mall to give me a haircut, because self-service haircuts are a terrible idea. But because I don't live in New Jersey, I get to do self-service gasoline, which I think is a great idea, because I do not understand the point of paying somebody an extra like 10 cents or whatever it is so they can pump your gas. I remember when I was a little kid, we were driving to like New York and we went through New Jersey, and it was a full, if I remember correctly, it was a full service state, and I was like, what? Why? And we have a spot here. There's one station nearby that's full service, and I don't get it. Maybe if you're elderly or whatever, makes sense. But so when we talk about reporting, though, what's self-service? So question for all of you is if I give you a link to a report, I used to do this in my last job. I would have SSRS reports, and they would get emailed out, and then there'd be a link to go view the SSRS, like the actual page. If a user clicks that report, if they click that URL, is that self-service? Have they served themselves something? And it's like, probably not, right? They've done something. They've taken an action to meet their needs, right? But that doesn't really feel like it, right? I mean, like, at the mall that we do have that is dying, there's now a self-service coffee shop or cafe, and it's just a bunch of vending machines and stuff, right? It's definitely not the same as if I go to Starbucks and they put a coffee out and they call my name and I've paid for it and they've made it all, and then I grab it, right? So that doesn't quite feel like self-service. But what if they're applying filters? Well, I mean, that might seem a little bit rudimentary, but that feels more interesting, because now, yes, they're not creating reports, they're not modifying reports, nothing's changing permanently. They're not doing any of this completely on their own initiative. But if you've put filters in those filter panes, you've opened up more possibilities for that user. This is starting to feel like they're exploring a little bit. Now, what if they're exporting data? We may not want them to do that, but I think Microsoft has begrudgingly learned that the most important data feature on any application is export to Excel, right? And so, if they're pulling out data and playing around with it, that starts to feel like self-service. If they're making data models, if they're creating visualizations or reports or what have you, okay, yeah, that starts to feel like self-service. The way that I generally define self-service BI is you're creating business meeting without needing IT help. Now, that does not mean that IT has to be completely out of the picture, right? Like there's that spectrum that we saw where you can have a hybrid approach. You can have an IT managed business model. You can have IT created reports, but you want to make it when you're creating these reports, you want to do more than just get the information to the person. And we'll talk about that with delaying, but think in your mind like just the raw table of data. Just imagine all of these ERP systems across the world that have like an export to CSV button, right? When you're creating reports, you want to do more than that. You want to enable that person to answer the next question and the next question. Sales are up. Well, why? Or where, or when. And so self-service BI is creating business meaning and taking advantage of, well, I don't like that phrasing, but collaborating with or making use of their business expertise. And I have learned to value business expertise as I've started to own a business. I think when I came out of college, I valued technical expertise a lot higher because I was young and I was naive, right? And you learn over time that every single business is this unique snowflake. And even if they're in the same industry, like I worked at a fire protection company, so they do sprinkler systems and fire alarms and all that stuff. And we were moving to an ERP system run by another fire protection company. And what we found was that, there was all these little edge cases of how they did things differently. And so what is smart is to bring the reporting as close to the people with the expertise. And I said that like I have a business, I have more appreciation. I almost cried trying to wrestle with my general ledger in QuickBooks, right? Because I would get paid for an invoice and then a bank deposit would come in. And because I had not done the work properly, it was double counting that. And so QuickBooks wanted to tell the IRS that I owed the government twice as much as I actually did. And I got it sorted out, but clearly I did not have the business acumen, right? So when we're thinking about this, about self-service and breaking it up, I like to think of it as kind of these three different groups of users. And how can I make it so my report meets all of these needs, right? So first you have business or report consumers. So these are just people that they just want the data, right? And oftentimes that's either more of a dashboard format where they just want situational awareness. That was a concept I got from Stephen Few in a book that I'll have at the end to recommend, where I understood better that a lot of what dashboarding is about is just understanding, are we going to hit the iceberg or not? Are we okay or are we not? So you have people who just kind of want this high level, and then you also have people who want just operational data. So you have report consumers, and then you have report explorers. And the cool thing is you can build stuff in Power BI to meet both of these needs. Report explorers are people that are willing to use filters, that are willing to drill down, that are willing to like click and cross filter and all this kind of stuff. And then you've got report producers. And, in my experience, these are a lot rarer. These are people who are willing to make new reports. And so there's this whole spectrum of self-service, of engagement. And in our design, we can try to meet the needs of all of these people as much as possible, especially those first two. So again, to kind of recap, you can have a fully centralized approach where you say, okay, everything's IT owned. And so then if you're doing that fully centralized approach, what you want to do is design into your reporting as much flexibility as you can without having to worry about alteration of the data or production of report artifacts that haven't been approved, right? And so a lot of that's going to be filtering. It's going to be having detail where you need it, all those sorts of things. What I see a lot is kind of more of a hybrid approach. And I think this can be the best of both worlds, because I think that it allows you to have kind of an approved data set, an approved data model, but then find ways for people to be able to more easily meet their own needs, create their own business logic sometimes, although, as I saw in the chat, learning DAX is a bear, right? And just allowing people to maybe take that data model and start start making stuff. And then finally, you can have a fully self-service kind of thing. If you're going that full self-service route, then you really want to think about trying to set a standard that shows people what can be done with the tooling, because it's just, at least with the customers that I've worked with, it very much trends towards just kind of boring, like, here's the data, here's what we had in Crystal reports, how do we do it in Power BI? And it's like, well, you can cook toast with a butane torch, but that's not what it's meant for, right? So help people understand the tool. Basically, they tend to want to just put just the raw data on there, or just to cram way too much stuff. I've seen both of those. Some quick benefits of centralized is that you get, for the data model and everything, you avoid reinventing the wheel. Star schema generally leads to better compression, better performance, a better user experience, as you have things kind of flowing from the dimension tables down to the transaction tables and all of that. So with all that, let's talk about the actual design piece. How do I build incrementally? I think that this is really, really important to consider, because I've worked with Excel, I've worked with SSRS, and I find that this is a bigger issue and a bigger value add in Power BI than in those other two tools, right? And so what we want to do is we want to iterate and expand our design, right? So like, I'm working on a project right now with Carlos and the SQL data partners, where we're trying to build some Power BI reports that can be integrated into an application. I I can't say just yet until it's public, but basically imagine your classic ERP application for a specific type of vertical, for a specific type of manufacturing vertical, I'll say. And so they have existing reports, and they're in Crystal reports, and they're kind of flat, right? And so what we're doing is we're trying to take this iterate and expand approach, where we get the basic data going, and then say, okay, well, how can we make it better? How can we add more detail, add more meaning? So at the very base is the raw descriptive data, right? This is in some ways functionally equivalent to pulling data out of SQL into an Excel file, right? It's a data dump. And that's where a lot of people start. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with any of that whatsoever. But that's kind of your starting point. And if you just wanted to show raw data, Excel is a better tool. SSRS, if you want to print it, is a better tool, right? Or sorry, I guess we're calling it paginated reports now, right? They took SSRS and they filed off the serial numbers, and then they put it in PowerBI.com, and we call it paginated reports. But if we were staying down here, Power BI would be an awful, awful tool, sincerely. But the next step, once we have the data, is we want to add business meaning, right? And this is an area where, at least in my opinion, Power BI starts to rival Excel and SSRS. And so when I say Excel, what I mean is not the Power BI functionality that's in Excel. So I'm not talking Power Pivot, I'm not talking Power Query, but I mean classic formulas, right? Classic pivot tables, that sort of thing, right? And so we've all run into this issue where you ask somebody like, hey, I was told I need to do a report on gross sales. What's gross revenue or what have you? And they'll say, oh, that's easy. It's just unit price times quantity. And you're like, okay, great. And then they're like, whoa. Sometimes we have discounts, so you need to subtract the discount percentage. You're like, okay, that's fine. And they're like, well, sometimes the moon is waxing gibbous on the third Thursday when it's over Africa, and we take off an extra 10% during that time. And you're like, every business is unique, and we really want to make use of the understanding of the domain experts. And so the very next thing is adding business meaning. And at this point still, Excel works great for this. SSRS can work great for this to a degree. At least in my recollection, the expression language was pretty rich in SSRS or paginated reports. But I don't recall there being a good way to define measures across multiple reports or that sort of thing. I could be wrong on that, but and Power BI is good at this. But what's next, right? Like, I'm not just going to sell you a trapezoid, right? There's clearly, I'm going somewhere. So the next layer is interaction. How can we make the report interactive? How can we give the user the ability to filter, the ability to click on things, the ability to explore the data? And this is where Power BI starts to shine. I know SSRS has very limited capabilities here. You can do parameters, which you can use for filtering and that sort of thing. I remember you could do like linked reports and some level of drill through capability. Excel, okay, I take that back. Excel's not bad with this because you have slicers, you have pivot tables. So you can do a lot of slicing and dicing and filtering. So Excel's pretty good at this. SSRS starts to falter though, right? And then the final piece is adding context. And you may be looking at all this stuff saying, well, I already have context, right? But adding situational context based on that interaction, right? This is truly where Power BI just stands alone out of those three Microsoft tools, right? I mean, you can accomplish some of this with Excel. It's very hard to do this with SSRS, but Power BI, people's eyes light up when you start doing this. So what does this look like, and what are some of the ways that we can do these pieces? So this is raw data, right? And some of you may recognize this is from the AdventureWorks sample database. And it's basically what it looks like, right? We're just displaying data. And we haven't done anything with conditional formatting to highlight things. We haven't added any meaning. We're just putting data on the screen. And this is a fine place to start. But again, if this is where you were going to land, you'd be better off with Excel. But the next step is to add business meaning. And so here we've got that line total. Now the AdventureWorks database already has a line total field, but you can imagine a situation where we didn't have that, and we want to reproduce that from scratch. So here I'm multiplying quantity times price times discount. So we're starting to be able to encapsulate the meaning of the business. And what's nice is that we can also start thinking about the distinction between summary data and descriptive or detailed data, right? And so we can start thinking in our design, how can we take advantage of how users scan when they're reading on the web or when they're using our reports? How can we start to think about using things like conditional formatting or icons or that sort of thing to highlight whenever maybe there's some sort of aberration, maybe there's some sort of error, something's an anomaly of some sort. You know, this is where we might also start adding in some of the basic formatting capabilities to help highlight where we want to draw the eye to. Once we've brought in the data and we've started adding some layer of meaning and explaining a little bit what's going on in the business with the way that we're highlighting things and the way that we're naming things, we can then start adding interactions. And this is really exciting, and this is really important because this is where we jump from supporting the report consumers to supporting the report explorers. And this is where we start enabling self-service. And there's a couple different ways that we can add interactions. What I have here on screen is an example of cross-filtering, which we'll talk about a little bit more. But cross-filtering is simply, I've clicked on a bar, and it's filtering that table. I've clicked on silver, and it's filtering the table. So how can we add interactions when we're dealing with Power BI? So the first one, and the most obvious one, is we can add filters. The filter pane in Power BI should be your best friend, right? Because it accomplishes a couple things. First, it's just a much better user experience than it used to be years ago, or with just putting slicers on there, right? Because you can hide it, you can you have all these filters in all in one place. It makes a distinction between filters that are applied to the visual, the page, or the report. So I would say nearly every report page you're making in Power BI should be taking advantage of that filter pane if possible. It is by far the simplest way to add user interactivity. And it's at least in my experience, people get it, right? They've interacted with enough pieces of software where that filter pane makes sense to them. Another thing is cross-filtering. So I already kind of explained it here, but this is also an area where you can allow exploration and self-service, right? So cross-filtering is simply when you click on part of the report, it filters that category for the rest of the page. And you can change the settings and decide whether you want it to just gray stuff out, like we see with the bar chart, or if you want it to just hide data entirely, right? So for something like a table, it's the same, it's going to hide it. But if we had two bar charts, the default behavior is if I clicked on silver and I had another bar chart for region, it would gray out most of, let's say, Latin America, except for whatever portion was silver. My personal preference is to change it so that it's just hiding everything, because what I found is unless you're dealing with very even proportions of a few things, you very quickly have something where, like, okay, it's cross-filtering, but most of it's grayed out except for like 1%, right? The other main way that we can add interactions is through drill downs. So drill throughs and drill downs are different, and I get them confused sometimes, and the customer I'm working with had some trouble kind of grasping the difference. But a drill down is basically allows you to go down to a lower level of detail within the same visual context. So for example, with this this bar chart for color, you could imagine a situation where we drill down from silver into specific product lines or something like that. And so it's the same bar chart, but now it's at a more granular level of detail. So these are simple ways that we can add basic interactions, and we're not asking a lot of the user. And for those filters, if they're using the powerbi.com service, then they can actually save those filters as personal bookmarks. So there's a lot of bang for your buck here. But where I see, like I said, I see people's eyes light up is when we can add context to our report. So what I have here is I have a rich tooltip. So here what I've done is I've changed some settings so that I can use what's essentially a smaller report page that you usually want to hide, that's been filtered to whatever context I'm looking at. So here, if I hover over blue products, I have another report page that's a tooltip sized, and it's showing the line total over time. And AdventureWorks is kind of funny because it's very spiky. You can tell it's generated data when you look at it over time because their sales data is very, very spiky. But this is really that inflection point where you go from, okay, we've got some basic data, we're meeting the needs. The data and the meaning, we've met the user needs. We've met what they've asked for usually. And then we add some interactivity and we're enabling them to answer another question, right? But it's stuff like this, especially with Power BI, because it's hard to do this in Excel, it's hard to do this in SSRS, where if I can give them the why. That makes the reports more engaging, more powerful, and allows them to answer their own questions. Another way that you can add context is through drill throughs. So a drill through takes you to a different report page, and it's filtered based on whatever context you were in. But commonly, I'll use this sort of thing whenever I have a lot of heavy detailed information and I want to be able to show that. Well, so two scenarios, sorry. One scenario is I have a lot of detailed information. So an example would be, I'm looking at this bar chart and I see that historical data over time, and I'm like, I want to know what the transactions looked like for that period. And so I will create a drill through page, and then I will set in Power BI, okay, the drill through filter is based on color. And so now in the future, if I right click on that bar, it'll take me to that page. And so a situation where you have a lot of detailed, like transactional information, it's good for. What it's also good for is whenever you want to have like this multifaceted view of the same entity. So a perfect example are customers. So for that manufacturing company that we're helping to augment their software, we have a drill through for customer because they've got a page for estimates, they've got a page for orders, they've got a page for delivery. I think there may be something else, right? And so we've created a customer drill through so that you can be on any one of those pages, look at some details for a specific customer, and then drill through and see, okay, how is the customer health doing as a whole? How are our estimates being delivered on time? How much do we have in our pipeline? How are sales doing? How are they doing compared to last year? And you can do that for customers. You can do that for customer service representatives, sales representatives, all this kind of stuff. So what you really want to try to aim for, if you're not sure of like where to get started, is this kind of spiral of growth where you start with the data, you figure out what the need is, and you start small and add this meaning, you add this context, you add this detail, you share, and you show people what can be done with the tool. And you allow people to be able to start to meet their own needs. And again, that whole discussion about self-service, it's a spectrum, right? Like I would argue that clicking a link in an email is not self-service, but using filters is in a way meeting their needs without needing IT help. So a couple other things I want to touch on, and then we're a little bit short, so I'd love to answer any questions that anyone has. So one of the things, a design principle I wanted to touch on is allow for scanning, right? This is probably one of the most important things, and a lot of stuff flows from this, right? So one of the things is start with the summary and then work your way down to the detail. Think about how people read. I don't know if it's different in countries where the languages read from right to left, but at least here in the United States, we read from the top to the bottom, from left to right, right? And you want to make it very clear how should the eye be moving, and you want to take advantage of that. So you want to start with your high-level detail on the top, and ideally top left, the most important thing at the top left, and kind of work your way down. You want to take advantage of color, but be aware that there are a surprising number of colorblind folks. It is common. I believe for men, the amount of red-green colorblind, I'll have to double check this, but I want to say it's somewhere between 8 and 12%. I remember it being very, very high. And then there's other types of color blindness, but that's one of the most prevalent. And so you never want your reporting to depend on people being able to distinguish between red and green, for example. But there are color palettes you can use, or you can use symbols and iconography to help accentuate things as well. But color is a great way to draw attention. You want to take advantage of, I'm going to get the name wrong, I believe it's called pre-attentive visual features. But there's books on basically what do we see before the conscious part of our brain has really picked up on this stuff. So use color, use white space, right? When we talk about understanding how the eye flows, have space between your reports, between your components. There's I think it's Edward Tufte that talked about the data to ink ratio, right? And how you want to make sure that if you have ink on a page or pixels on a screen, it's showing as much, you're getting the most bang for your buck, right? And there's a book I'm about to recommend by Stephen Few, where he likes to just pack as much stuff as possible onto the screen as possible. And he has his reasons, he has good reasons, but I think white space is really important. You want to make sure that there's a natural flow to the report. It's easy to just jump to what you want to look at, but also remember, this isn't a newspaper article. All of what we just covered, we've got all these ways to add interactivity, add context, add detail, and so we can afford to have some space. And I kind of already said this, but I'm gonna, in the book I'm about to suggest, understand how we read online. People skim, people jump around. They've done eye tracking studies, right? And you'd be surprised how little people read. And so I think it's really important to understand that and embrace it, right? This isn't SRS, this isn't something being printed out. We should not expect people to read all the way from top to bottom every single thing, right? We want to be able to support people kind of jumping around. So there's a number of books out there on design, that sort of thing, but there's two books that for me were really instrumental in me getting better and making better reports in terms of design. And I'll be honest, this is probably the area where I have the most growth to do. So if you have recommended reading, I'd love to hear it, because I've always been much better at thinking in terms of data and models, but the visual stuff, it's hard. I remember years ago, I wish I could attend this presentation because I didn't know how to make a report. I could get it onto the screen, but I didn't know what I was doing. So this is actually a book on web design, but it's a short read. It's a really good read, and everyone here should read it. It's called Don't Make Me Think, Revisited by Steve Krug. I read the second edition. I don't know how much has changed in the third edition. I don't think it's a ton. I will warn you, if you read the second edition, a lot of the website examples are old, like 90s old, but the principles are still there. And definitely one of the biggest things that I learned from that is just the simple fact that people scan. They don't read websites. And so you want to write your reports in such a way that you can take advantage of that. Then have your card visualizations, have your clear bar charts and all those sorts of things. Make it really easy with color and other things at a glance to tell what's going on. And then the other book that really changed things for me is Information Dashboard Design by Stephen Few. And I will warn you, he does have some very strong opinions. And some of his strong opinions are not very well supported in Power BI. It's gotten better, right? Like they have the small multiples visualization. It's a little bit easier to do spark lines, I think, right? He loves his spark lines, his spark charts, which is a lot easier to do in Excel. So he's very opinionated. But what I found really helpful is that this gave me a vocabulary for thinking about dashboards. And I don't mean the PowerBI.com dashboards that look more like Pinterest, but what is a dashboard and why do people want it? And getting the term, this is where I got the term situational awareness, right? Like you're a fighter pilot and you want to know who's on your six or whatever. This book really provided me with a lot of context. So yeah, I know there's some other books. I can't remember off the top of my head the one that I remember reading years ago that talked about some of those pre-attentive visual details, that sort of thing. Another person, not a book writer, but I definitely recommend highly, is Megan Longoria. She's big in our field, and she's always willing to die on the hill of accessibility in reporting. And I think a lot of things that make a good report accessible also make them just broadly more usable. So she has a great blog. I definitely recommend that. So yeah, so that's the presentation. Does anyone have any questions? I really appreciate the chance to present to everyone here.
So I don't see many questions, Eugene. They probably will come streaming in, but there was a question just came in. Do you have her blog link to share?
I will post that in there right now. Give me one moment. Thank you for that. There it is. Yeah, it's datasavvy.me. So I'm posting it in right now. Yeah, no, she's just phenomenal, and she's got stuff on Power BI specifically, but also just report accessibility. So I talked about color blindness. There's stuff on font. You can have tab order in Power BI reports. You can have alt text, if I remember correctly. There's stuff you can do to take people into consideration. Yep, Donald also posted it. Thank you. But she's got some really great stuff. I plan on reading through some of hers when I do a slide refresh, because I bought this slide deck off of like graphicriver.com, and it looked cool at the time, but you know, it could be better, right? You know, in terms of the contrast ratio and some other things. So, good question. She focuses very heavily in the Power BI. So we have a question from Tan. She focuses very heavily in the Power BI space. That's her tool of choice, but she talks about general principles all the time. So even if you've never touched Power BI, I 100% recommend reading her blog. Like I said, there's a couple posts on inclusive PowerPoint design that she has that I plan on reading through when I update my slide deck. So good question.
Cool.
Yeah.
Any other questions, guys, for Eugene, or anybody in the audience?
I mean, even if you've I've got time to hang out. So if you've got general Power BI questions, or you want to know as like being a consultant or a Pluralsight author, I'm also happy to talk about that as well. I just want to make sure, again, because some confusion on my part, if there's any gaps or something that I didn't get a good chance to cover, I'd be happy to talk about those.
Well, Damo has a good question. In a report page, what is a good percentage of text versus visuals?
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, so I would say what I've found to work really well is to either go with a 1/3, 2/3 approach or a 50-50 approach. That I've seen that work really well. And what's cool is, like I said, you can create those background templates really easily. So I was doing some subcontracting work. We actually paid a graphic designer to make these images that we could set as the background templates. But you can do that with PowerPoint. But what I find is that if you're looking at like a scanning kind of approach, then you want at least the top third to be visuals, so that you have enough space for the detail, or have enough space for the summary statistics, summary information, and that people were able to like zoom in on it, so to speak, right? But if there's a lot going on in those visualizations, then like a 50-50 kind of approach seems to work a bit better. Is just my experience. We've got a question about data labels. I do not know off the top of my head. I feel like, let me get a link real quick. I think Reed Haven. Let me see. Is that his name? No. No, I can find an answer to that, but I don't know off the top of my head. I know. I don't remember the guy's name. Reed Havens. Here we go. I'll post that. I know Reed Havens talks a lot on YouTube about this kind of stuff, and I feel like I saw he had something. And then also hold on. So Tan, my email is eugene@sequelgene.com. I'm going to be on vacation in 2 days, but feel free to shoot me an email with any like questions like that, and I'm happy to find an answer. Right. So Lance had a question about Pluralsight. Is there a quota for number of courses? No, it's so I am not an employee of Pluralsight, right? In theory, I can do as many or as few courses as I want. And some people do that. It's kind of like this fun money kind of stuff. But the thing that I've run into is that Pluralsight has gotten more targeted with the content that they want. They're trying to be curriculum driven, and they're also data is a growing space for them. It is a greenfield space for them, whereas like some of the IT ops and development stuff is more in maintenance mode. And so what that means is nowadays you have to be really flexible with the stuff that you're willing to do a course on, right? So I did like 5 Power BI courses, and the Power BI path was done. And then I was like, hey, do you guys want any more Power BI stuff? And they're like, all right, we're good right now. And so I did a course on Excel, which was my worst course ever. You would think it would be great, but it was literally to finish their learning path. So it was at the very end, and it was on sharing and distributing Excel files. So it was how to hit print and hit export to PDF and that sort of thing. And then I did a course on Azure Event Hubs, a course on Spark Structured Streaming, a course on Kafka and KSQL DB, and now I'm doing one on Jaspersoft. So if you want to do this full time, you have to be really flexible with what you're willing to make content on. If you want to make some Xbox money, you know, it's really easy to reach out to them to talk to an acquisitions editor. The audition process is basically doing a recorded lightning talk for the most part, and they've said they had about a 5% acceptance rate. So, but good question. Yeah.
Good to know. Let's see. Okay, we answered that. Any other questions, guys, for for the community or Eugene? Anything Power BI or Microsoft BI related?
I appreciate the encouragement and the thank yous from everyone. I'm I'm glad you enjoyed the talk. I had, like I said, I had a brief like heart palpitation a little bit earlier. I'm like, wait, what am I presenting on? Oh, my favorite DAX learning source. Well, there's this great course on Pluralsight. No, kidding. Yeah, so there's 2 books that I enjoy a lot. There's one by Rob Colley and Avi Singh. It's gonna hold on. I'll post in links because I want to actually get this right. Here we go. It's Power Pivot and Power BI. It's a little dated at this point, but the thing that I like about it, let me stop sharing. The thing that I like about it is that it's an easy read, right? Like it's the only technical book I could imagine reading on a beach, right? So it's a little dated, but it's still a good intro to a lot of this stuff. And then, Tan mentioned SQL BI, so Marco Russo and Alberto Ferrari. They have 2 really, really good books. Like, there's one on data modeling, so data, which I'll post in there. And I kid you not, I learned some important data modeling fundamentals from that book, and I thought it was going to be kind of like intro level kind of stuff because it has, it sounded like it was like, baby's first Excel and DAX, but no, like they cover core data modeling concepts and just happen to be using DAX, right? And then they've got another book, the DAX Fundamentals. It's big enough that you could like beat somebody with it. And it is, if there was an exam on DAX, that would be the exam prep. DAX Fundamentals. So those resources were really helpful for me. A lot of it's just been like painful trial and error, honestly. Like I still support an application I wrote in Power Pivot and Access. You talk about self-service BI. Well, they didn't want anything to do with IT, right? And I've got code in there that's ugly, ugly, ugly. Like I thought that if you wanted to do any sums, you had to wrap it into calculate. I thought that's what calculate did. Was it like told the sum to sum? I did lookup value function calls instead of related. I thought earlier was going to give the earlier row as opposed to the outer context, like all this stuff. So yeah, those books I found really helpful, but otherwise just lots of painful trial and error.
Painful trial.
Question.
There we go. No pain, no gain. Anything else, guys? Any other questions? I'm gonna finish a little bit early today
Good.
than we usually do. I guess
Yeah.
we are running out of questions. Well, Eugene, that was great. Thank you so much. Okay, there was another one just came in.
Great. I have not looked at this feature honestly, so I don't know much about the quick create Power BI reports from lists. So I will have to look into that. I don't have a good answer for you, but I posted my email. So I'm happy to hang out, but feel free to email me questions. My general rule is, if I can answer it in 10 or 15 minutes, or I can make a blog post out of it, I'm always happy to help the community. If you need an hour of my time and you want me to say how high when you say jump, then we're just talking about consulting. But yeah, feel free to email me now, or like I said, I will be back on the 14th, hopefully well rested, fully vaccinated. And so if anything comes up, please feel free to reach out.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, I guess that's gonna be it for tonight. I'm gonna return 30 minutes of your time back, and yeah, you can enjoy it. And then next one is gonna be May 3rd for Synapse. Stay tuned. I'll see you. I'll see you there.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Sure. Yep.
Yeah, this is New York. I apologize for kind of jumping.
It's okay.
But I would like to communicate via email. Could you please tell me where can I get your email?
My email? My email is in the chat window. You can use my business one. You asking for my email or Eugene's email?
Is anybody? So I'm on my. I'm accessing this meeting on my my phone, and I'm not sure how to get to the. I'm sorry, it's kind of to the chat. But
the chat window? Okay.
Well,
you asking for my email?
I got it. I got it. Never mind.
You got it?
I got
okay, cool.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Anybody else? Anything of interest? Well, I guess not. A recording, give me an hour. Once it's done, we'll post it on the .url that I shared, bit.ly, Atlanta BI Rex. And I'll see you next month, guys. Have a great, month, and make sure you vaccinate yourself. Very important.
Thank you.
Otherwise, we won't be able to get back together. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Guys.